At him, this cowboy with sun-darkened skin and eyes, the color of storm clouds ready to break. A man she did not know, yet whose presence filled the room with a safety she had never felt in all her weary travels. He asked no questions at first, not about where she had come from or why she had collapsed, only tending to her needs with quiet devotion. And she watched him in silence, the tears she had held back for so long finally slipping free down her cheeks, for it had been years since anyone had cared enough to simply stay. At last, when the silence grew too heavy, he spoke softly. "You don't have to tell me a thing until you're ready. But if you need a place to rest, this home's got room for you." She swallowed, her throat tight, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I had nowhere else to go. I thought I could make it, but the journey, it took everything from me." The cowboy nodded slowly, his jaw firm yet his gaze gentle, and he replied, "Well, you made it far enough to find me, and I reckon that's no accident." His words carried weight, as if fate itself had written this moment into their lives, and though she was weak, hope stirred faintly in her heart like embers coaxed back to flame. Over the next hours and into the quiet evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, she rested in his home, and he busied himself with small tasks, stirring broth on the stove, tending to the fire, mending a loose hinge on the door, all while keeping an ear tuned to her breathing, each act of care weaving a bond stronger than words could explain. The night came soft, crickets singing outside the window, and she found her strength returning little by little, enough to sit up and gaze at him across the room, where he leaned back in a chair, hat resting on his knee, his eyes half-lidded but ever watchful. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly, her voice fragile yet sincere, and he looked at her for a long moment before answering, his words simple but true. "Because sometimes a soul just needs somebody to care enough to lift him back up." She turned those words over in her heart, realizing they carried more weight than any treasure she had ever sought. And though she did not yet know his name, or what road awaited her tomorrow, she felt a stirring of gratitude and trust, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she could breathe again. The cowboy leaned forward then, his tone gentle yet firm, and said, "You're safe here, and as long as I've got strength in me, you won't have to face this world alone." And though her body trembled, though her spirit bore scars too deep to name, she believed him, and in that belief found rest at last. Friends, if this story stirred your heart, if you felt the strength of compassion and the power of hope rising through these words, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because more stories like this are waiting for you. Stories that remind us that kindness, it was a weary afternoon in the heart of a dusty western town, the kind where the sun bore down heavy and merciless on every soul that lingered too long beneath its punishing rays, and the air hung still as if it too had grown tired of moving. At the depot, where the whistle of a passing train had just faded into the horizon, a frail woman dressed in a travel-worn gown clutched her chest and staggered, her eyes rolling with exhaustion as the crowd of strangers passed by without noticing her plight. For life in the frontier left little room for compassion when each man and woman already carried burdens too heavy to speak of. But as she fell to her knees and collapsed upon the weathered boards of the station platform, one man stood apart from the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered beneath a sun-faded hat, his boots clicking sharp against the planks as he strode forward, his eyes narrowing, with a spark of urgency that cut through the haze of indifference around them. The cowboy knelt beside her, his strong hand lifting her gently, brushing away the tangled strands of hair that had fallen across her pale, sweat-streaked face. And in that moment he saw not just a stranger in distress, but a soul caught in the struggle of life, someone who had fought too long, carried too much, and now had nothing left to give, and his voice, low and steady like a river running deep, broke the silence around them as he said, "You're safe now, ma'am. I got you." The woman, her lips trembling as though she wished to protest, could barely form words, her whisper faint as a breeze through cracked wood. "Please, don't trouble yourself." But the cowboy only shook his head, lifting her into his arms as though she weighed no more than a child, his muscles tightening beneath her fragile frame, and with long strides he carried her past the stares of bystanders, past the noise of wagons clattering on the street, past the murmur of voices too stunned to act, and he moved with a purpose that no one dared question. The woman's head rested against his chest, and though her body was weak, her ears caught the steady rhythm of his heart, a sound that anchored her trembling spirit and eased her fears, as if life itself had not yet finished its story with her. He carried her down the road to his small homestead on the edge of town, where the fence leaned, slightly with age, but the roses, his late mother once planted still, bloomed with wild courage, and he kicked open the door with his boot, stepping inside to the cool shade of his cabin, laying her upon a quilt-covered bed that smelled faintly of cedar and clean cotton. There, in the dim light, he fetched water and pressed a damp cloth to her forehead, coaxing her to sip from a cup he held steady against her lips, and each motion spoke louder than words, telling her she was not alone, telling her that kindness still lived even in a land so harsh. As she slowly regained her strength, her eyes fluttered open and she found herself staring. Still lives in this world, that heroes walk among us in the quietest of forms, and that love has a way of finding us even when we are too weak to keep walking. So hit that button, stay with us, and let's journey together through more tales of courage, redemption, and the kind of love that lifts us up when we can no longer stand. The dawn broke gentle over the plains, a soft golden light spilling through the window of the cowboy's cabin, painting the quilt where the woman lay with warmth. And for the first time in many months she woke without the sound of clattering wheels, without the harsh voices of strangers demanding her strength when she had none left to give. She woke to the sound of a rooster in the distance, the crackle of kindling catching in the fireplace, and the faint hum of a man who moved about with purpose but not haste, a man who had given her not only shelter but dignity, for he had asked nothing from her, not even her name, and yet given everything in return. Her body ached still, but the kind of ache that follows deep rest, as though her bones remembered the years of hardship, but were slowly learning the meaning of ease. She pushed herself up, surprised at the steadiness of her hands, and as she glanced toward the small kitchen she saw him, the cowboy, sleeves rolled to his forearms as he stirred a pot, his broad back straight, his movements steady, a man carved from the land itself, quiet yet enduring. She thought of how easily he might have left her at the depot, just another burden in a world already weighted by struggle, and yet he had lifted her as though it were his calling, as though her fall into weakness had been written into his purpose. She cleared her throat softly and he turned, his storm gray eyes meeting hers with the kind of calm that spoke louder than words. "Mornin', ma'am," he said, voice low but carrying like the first notes of a hymn. "How you feelin'?" She swallowed, her voice timid yet steadier than before. "Better, better than I deserve." He shook his head, ladling broth into a bowl and carrying it to her with steps that carried no hurry yet no doubt either. "Everyone deserves a chance to rest," he said, setting the bowl before her, "especially someone who's walked as far as you clearly have." She sipped, the warmth spreading through her chest, and tears pricked her eyes, because it had been so long since anyone had looked at her as though she mattered. At last, when she felt courage stir faintly in her heart, she whispered her name, soft as if afraid the world might shatter if she spoke it aloud. "My name is Clara." He nodded once, repeating it under his breath as though sealing it in his memory. "Clara, name suits you." She managed a faint smile, though her voice wavered when she asked, "And you? What shall I call the man who carried me when I could not walk?" He met her gaze, steady and sure. "Folks call me Cole." The names hung between them, no longer strangers but